Welcome to the Dr. Joe Show. Hi, I'm Dr. Joe Beam. We're talking about the Bible, but also talking about sex. As a matter of fact, we started the last program by saying that Christians ought to have the most fulfilling, exciting, adventurous sex life of anybody. Well, it's going to take me a few sessions to prove that to you. Now, I talked as a sexologist, meaning one who studies sex and teaches about sex in the last episode. I'm going to keep doing that, and to a little bit of a degree, I'm going to be a little bit repetitive. Not a lot, but a little bit repetitive because I want to make some more points about what I was talking about. Now, the passage that I read as we were in the last session, the passage that I read was 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 2 through 5. The Apostle Paul, as inspired by the Holy Spirit, said, "But since there is so much immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. The husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. The wife's body does not belong to her alone, but also to her husband. In the same way, the husband's body does not belong to him alone, but also to his wife. Do not deprive each other, except by mutual consent and for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer. Then come together again, so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control." Now let's take that passage apart, thought by thought, idea by idea, and teach some things about sex, but also some things about how a Christian should be approaching sex. Understand that in this particular context of 1 Corinthians chapter 7, he was telling them, if you can't control your sex drive, you need to get married. And it would be a bad thing if you got married because you needed to fulfill your sex drive, and then your spouse said, not me, I'm not interested. So he said, okay, what you need to understand is this, that both of you have a sex drive. He says that the wife owns the husband's body and the husband owns the wife's body. That it's not just my body anymore, it's my wife. She has ownership of it because of the fact that we're married. Now, that doesn't mean that she can use and abuse me. Don't get it like that. The Bible talks about moderation in all things. And so we're going to be talking about moderation. Not abuse, not using the other person, not making them feel as if they have no value other than for the sex that they're involved in. But he's saying here that both men and women have a sex drive. Now, occasionally, if I'm teaching a live audience that, some guy will say, well, not my wife. She probably does. And if you're not aware of it, in other words, if you're not just joking, if you're not aware of it, then we probably have some difficulty going on in this relationship. Before we finish this series, I'm going to show you through what we found in research about what has significantly reduced many women's sexual drive to be with their husbands and many husbands' sexual desire to be with their wives. Now, I actually did a survey of 5,000 people. They were all in America, 21 years or older, married, living with their spouse within the United States. And I'm going to show you some of that research in future episodes so that we can see some things here. And so unless the woman is asexual, asexual means there's just no sensation, there's no titillation there. That her clitoris, for example, doesn't really give her the sensations. Understand that the clitoris is the only organ in a human body that is there for one purpose and one purpose only, and that is to give pleasure. Now, the man's penis also gives pleasure, particularly the head of the penis, and particularly that little strip just under the head that's called the frenulum. It can be an extremely sensitive area that helps him to come to orgasm. Well, the clitoris does the same thing for the female, not just the part of the clitoris that you see, which is not typically that long, but the crura, the legs, which means that as you go back into the woman's body, that little clitoris that you see branches out and has a leg going down each side of the vagina. They're just behind the major lips, the labia majora. And they're designed so that during PVI, penile vaginal intercourse, when the man is moving in and out of the woman's vagina, it actually moves those lips, which stimulates the part of the clitoris behind, or beside, I should say, but inside the body, but beside the vagina. Now, understand that I'm not trying to treat you like you don't know anything. But I'm trying to point out here that God put that in there. That's part of the female so that she can have pleasure. Now, I read a paper by an evolutionist who said, well, the reason that nature put a clitoris in a woman is so that she would have sex, so that there would be babies. Because if she didn't feel any desire, if she didn't feel any pleasure, she might not ever accept any sex, and therefore we can't reproduce. Well, I'm a believer in God, and I'm a believer in creation. I believe that God made us this particular way, and we can talk about that in a future episode if you like. But that clitoris is there to give her pleasure. If it's not working, there's some kind of either emotional, mental, or physical disorder. And most of the time, those can be dealt with. With some, it means that the particular clitoris of that woman needs more sensation than is usually required by most females. Hopefully, I'll remember to come back to that in a little while. But look at that. It says that both of them have a desire, both of them. Now, I found this little chart by this tremendous researcher whose name I cannot pronounce. I actually wrote her an email. She responded. I said, I'm looking at your name. I don't know how to pronounce your last name. And she wrote back and said, exactly like it looks. So I'm not going to try to pronounce her name right here. It's going to be up on your screen there. You can see her name. But she put together this little chart, and it's a brilliant chart. Now, she says it's about women, but in my interaction with her, when I was interacting with her by email, I think that your chart here applies equally to men. To which she replied, I think it does too. But my research is about females. Now, you can see that little diagram up on the board there, and all credit goes to her. It's not mine. And you can look her up if you want to read some of her research. She's a brilliant researcher. And so the willingness, the top left-hand corner up there, the willingness to become receptive. Notice that big arrow going to the right. Sexual stimuli with appropriate context. What that means is that men can get aroused by sexual stimuli pretty much in any context. Not altogether, but pretty much in any context. But a woman can't. And so let's say that there are people nearby. She can hear them talking and she thinks they can see me. Unless a woman finds that, the fact that somebody else might see or hear, if she finds that stimulating, then she can become stimulated. If she finds that off-putting, like, oh no, somebody's going to see me naked, somebody's going to hear what we're doing, it's going to be really bad, I don't want to do this, then no matter how much stimulation you provided for her, she will not become aroused. And so that's what it's saying, sexual stimulation with appropriate context. Now, if you go on over psychological and biological processing, what that means is women actually have to decide they want to be involved in sex. A guy can get caught up in the ecstasy of it and plow right on through that without ever stopping to think about it whatsoever. Now, I'm not trying to justify men. I'm not trying to condemn men. I'm trying to say that men are more directly driven. And the woman, though, has got to stop and think about it. Now, when she does, it's going to take a little while for her body to get aroused. Now, men can become aroused very quickly. What happens is the smooth muscle at the base of the penis relaxes. Blood then flows into the penis, and then that smooth muscle basically closes it off. And so there is an erection there because there's blood that's keeping it erect that's been allowed in where that smooth muscle moved. And it can happen very, very quickly. I mean, like that. Now, if that blood stays in there too long, there's going to be a difficulty. You've heard the commercials with Viagra and such products, and they say, if your erection lasts more than, 4 hours? Is that what they say? If your erection lasts more than 4 hours, go to the emergency room. Well, you would wrap the penis in ice, and you would take it to the ER, and they're going to take a big hypodermic, and they're going to stick it in there and pull that blood out. You say, why? Because that blood's not circulating. Therefore, that blood's going to lose life force in it, and you don't want that to happen, or bad things can happen to the penis. So the erection can happen very quickly. Now, the wife or the woman, for the most part, is different because not only, first of all, it has to be psychological. Okay, I want to be involved in this. And then biological. What's going to happen now is that her breasts are actually going to enlarge. They're going to get bigger. And the areola, the nipples, They're actually going to get bigger and more sensitive. And then down in her genitalia, now understand that what's outside the body is called the vulva. Only what's inside the woman's body is what's called the vagina. So most of the time, people are talking about vulva when they say the word vagina. But the vagina is inside. And so what happens now? Well, there's a little gland up toward the end, close to the outside, and there's some lubricant that comes through that gland, but not nearly enough to make her lubricated enough for the PVI. And so what happens? There's a process called transudation. It just shows the power and the majesty of God. You say, what do you mean transudation? The capillaries on the outside of the vaginal walls begin to leak blood, if you will, into the vaginal wall. And as that blood goes through the vaginal wall, by the time it gets to the inside of the vagina, it's a lubricant. It's not blood anymore. It's a lubricant, and that's called transudation. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. God made us that way, and that gives the woman the lubrication, if indeed she is thoroughly aroused, so that if there is penile vaginal intercourse, that it's not going to be painful for her. Her vagina also is 3 to 5 inches long, but it's the sides, the walls of it are looks kind of like an accordion. And so it can actually lengthen itself for longer penises. Now, typically it won't have to because most men aren't that big. The average American is like just a tad over 5 inches when erect. And so not a whole lot of that expansion is called for with most men. But all of that's happening because of the fact that now you can have her being stimulated, her clitoris being stimulated, etc. Now, to understand her arousal, if she becomes more and more stimulated, the clitoral hood that moved back so that her clitoris could become stimulated so that arousal could take place. If she becomes overstimulated, that little hood will come back over the clitoris to protect it, to keep you from becoming too aroused. Now, that's not just from PVI. That could also be from things like digital sex, which means you use your fingers. It can be things like oral sex, which means the mouth is involved. It can be things like mechanical sex, which would be some kind of a vibrator, for example. And we'll talk about all those things later. I'm not saying what's right, what's wrong. I'm saying we'll get to those things. But either way, it still works the same. And so she gets to have this amazing sensation and power. All right, so it goes on from there. So that's subjective arousal, if you're watching and following that big white arrow, which comes down to arousal and responsive sexual desire. Now, if you go the corner back up toward willingness there, notice it says sexual satisfaction with or without orgasms. There are many women who can be totally satisfied without having the orgasm. But I think it would be worthwhile to ask, do you want that orgasm or not? And so look where that goes to. It heads up to the word called motivation. If that happens in that way, you understand that she's more motivated to want to have sex again the next time. Now, notice a little thing that says spontaneous innate desire, which means that sometimes all of this can happen without that initial stimuli in the appropriate context. She may just start loving and want to love on her husband for whatever reason. And so it's called innate in the sense there's no specific thing you can look at that kicks it off, but still go through the same process. It has to be the mind and the body all the way down to the orgasm and back up. But look over here. If you look back at the bottom again, on the bottom right, it says arousal and responsive sexual desire. Now look directly to the left of that. Non-sexual awards, emotional intimacy, well-being, lack of negative effects from sexual avoidance. And that means that for the woman, and I think it's just as true for the man, that even if she doesn't orgasm, even if it's not the most exciting experience she's ever had, all of these non-sexual rewards still lead her to want to have sex again. Notice goes up to multiple reasons and incentives for instigating or agreeing to sex. Now, if you follow that chart all the way around, and I'm saying this primarily for the gentleman, understand that she is made to be sexual. She can have orgasms and should every time she wants to. If she decides that she doesn't want the orgasm, you should be happy with that and give her all the other attention, the kissing, the hugging, the cuddling, the affirmations about her beauty and all those kinds of things. And if all of that happens, then she will want to have sex with you the next time. You say, okay, Dr. Beam, then are you implying that if these things don't happen, she may not want to have sex the next time? So let's suppose, and this is a terrible idea, let's suppose the husband is forcing himself sexually on his wife and she doesn't want it. Well, there's no sexual stimuli with appropriate context, and the spontaneous is not occurring. And so right off the bat, he's trying to get her to be psychologically and biologically ready by forcing himself on her. Now, this can happen before her body takes all the time to do the things I just described. And by the way, it would not be unusual for a woman's body to take up to 20 minutes to go through that process after deciding to be involved in sex, for the breast to swell, the areola, the transudation, all those kinds of things can take up to 20 minutes. Now, the guy might have been ready just like that. So if he forces himself on her too quickly, understand that it can be a painful experience for her. And so she's not biologically ready and therefore will not become subjectively aroused. And her response won't be from sexual desire. It'll be painful, or if not physically painful, emotionally painful, like you're taking advantage of me. I'm not your partner in this. And then none of these other things come along there. The orgasm typically won't happen. The non-sensual rewards typically aren't going to happen. And so she finds this to be a sexual experience that she does not want to be part of again because of the fact either that he didn't wait long enough or that he forced himself on her when she did not want it. Now, listen to what I said earlier about the fact that her body belongs to him, his body belongs to her, 1 Corinthians chapter 7. But I also said it should be by mutual consent, not just when you don't have sex, but when you do. Because anybody who is forced to do anything will resent it. Now, sometimes a guy will force himself on his wife, and she will orgasm, and he'll say, see there, she wanted it, she liked it. That's not the case. You see, the emotional fulfillment, the psychological fulfillment is extremely powerful and extremely important to women. Some men who go from partner to partner to partner to partner, or even some women who go from partner to partner to partner, the main thing about sex for them is the physical sensation. But the main thing about sex that should be happening, if you really want to have it the way that God intended it, is not just that your bodies are fulfilling each other, but that your hearts, your minds, your souls, you're connecting on a very deep spiritual level, even while you're making love to each other. Now, by doing that, then you're having some extremely fulfilling sex. And so those people who just go from partner to partner to partner can have all kinds of physical stimulation, but they're missing out on the deepest levels of joy, the deepest levels of pleasure that come with sex. And so if the wife orgasms like that, you said, does that mean that she just wants to go from man to man? Nothing. No. If she orgasms when she's being pressured to, even if she's being raped, if a woman orgasms, it doesn't mean she liked it. It doesn't mean she wants more of it. It simply means that the right places were touched in the right ways. In other words, enough stimulation went to the clitoris that it led to an orgasm, even though she didn't even want to be in that situation. And the fact that she orgasms doesn't change the situation. She still didn't want to be in that situation. I hope you're seeing the point here. It's not just an orgasm. It's not just stimulating certain parts of the body with your fingers or your mouth or tongue, whatever it might be. It's about truly connecting to each other. And the thing that I call Solomon sex. We'll get to that just a couple of episodes from now. Okay, another thing here is that he said in that passage that you're supposed to fulfill each other. So it's part of the marital duty. Really? It's part of the covenant between a man and a woman when they marry each other, is that I'm going to sexually fulfill you as best I can, and you're going to sexually fulfill me as best you can. So it's not like, okay, we're married to each other, maybe you'll get to have sex with me, maybe you won't. In that particular passage, it says to us who are believers, we are going to have sex because our bodies belong to each other. And notice the other thing here. It says, don't deprive each other, except by mutual consent and for a time, that you may give yourselves to prayer and then come together again so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Now you might be thinking, should we be having sex regularly? Let me tell you what we have found in the medical sciences about what happens when people are regularly having sex with each other. For example, we put up here on the chart here, you'll see that little arrow. See the word frigidity? Believe it or not, that word is still used in sexuality or in sexology. Frigidity meaning here somebody that just doesn't get turned on, doesn't want to be involved in it, doesn't yield to it, etc. But notice here, frigidity actually can increase the likelihood that a woman will have a heart attack. Really? Really. The more orgasmic a woman is, the less likelihood that she'll ever have a heart attack. I believe, if I remember correctly, that was either an Israeli study or it was an English study. I can look it up if you want to know more about it. And another thing benefiting women, you see this graph up here with this little triangle where it says health benefits stress. When they surveyed women saying, what was a primary benefit you got from having sex, particularly asking about orgasms, and 32% of women said, well, it helps me go to bed and sleep. It actually makes my brain get to a place where I can sleep. Another 39% of women said it can help me relax. And then when that happens, oxytocin is released into the brain. Actually, it's released into the body in two ways, into the autonomic nervous system and also into the bloodstream as a hormone. And oxytocin is this extremely powerful bonding system. Some oxytocin is released if you just hold hands. More oxytocin is released if you're hugging and cuddling each other. More oxytocin is released if you're kissing each other. But the greatest amount of oxytocin, other than at childbirth, oxytocin is the chemical that starts labor for the woman. But other than at childbirth, oxytocin, the strongest version of it, the most that goes into you and being made by you, of course, but that spreads through your body, comes with orgasm. And so it's creating a situation where that you will bond with each other. Now, if you're doing it just for sex, like a guy going from woman to woman or a woman going from man to man, you say, does the oxytocin still get released? Mm-hmm. Does it bond this person to the one they just had sex with? Not necessarily, because there was no strong emotional connection there. The oxytocin was released, but probably just more of a sense of me, that I want what I want. Whereas if you take your time, you love each other, you emotionally connect, you care about each other, and take your time making love to each other, when that oxytocin is produced at orgasm in both her bodies and in his body, it actually brings you much, much closer together. One of my friends, he's gone to be with Jesus now. His wife has also gone to be with Jesus. When I was about 35 years old, he was teaching a Bible class at our church. He was teaching a men's Bible class. He said, gentlemen, when my wife and I have a particularly wonderful sexual experience, we get off on the side of the bed on our knees and pray and thank God for that opportunity to fulfill each other. Not long before he died, his wife had already died. I reminded him of that statement. He says, I still believe it to be true. He said, up until a few months before my wife died, we still made love to each other. We still prayed and thanked God for the experience. And he talked with a Montgomery, Alabama accent. He said, Joseph, you tell these young people now they need to be doing that, making love to each other in the way God wants, so they can pray with each other and get closer. One last benefit here from the health side of it is that orgasms are analgesic, but not, let's see, what's the word I'm looking for? Not an anesthesia. Too many A words in the words there. Analgesic is like an aspirin, like an ibuprofen, like a Tylenol, which means that it'll reduce the sensation of pain. But if it were like an anesthesia, it's not going to put you to sleep. It's not going to knock you out. It's not going to make you where you don't have any physical sensations, but it will block painful sensations. One of the lectures I heard once at the World Congress for Sexual Health, a lady was speaking, and here was the title. She said, please tonight, I have a headache, meaning it can actually help stop that pain. You say, really? Really? And about that stress, I had a nurse tell me one time, she said, sometimes a doctor will get particularly testy, hard to get along with, irritable. And she said, and nurses can be very irritating people. She said that when that happens with the doctors on our floor, we tell them to go home and make love to their wives. I said, really? She said, absolutely. They come back. They're calmer. They're much more at peace. They're not as irritable as they were before. So that's what we tell them. Look, you're having a bad day. Go home, make love to your wife, come back. You said, does that really work? It really does. Okay. And so I would say the next time your husband or your wife is grouchy, if they're willing to participate with you, say, let's make love. If they will allow it, if they will participate, being involved with it, you can change that attitude pretty rapidly through making love to each other. Well, he also said here that if you don't have sex with each other, make it for a mutual consent that we both agree for a time so that you pray, so that you won't be tempted. Well, I've been through 2 of these already. You say, Dr. Beam, are you going to get to the point of telling us how we can make love to each other and find all this excitement that you're talking about? Yes. But in the next episode, I'm going to need to do something a little bit different because there are some things in the Bible that the Bible says you shouldn't do. Before you panic, stay with me. I've been able to sum them up in about 3 different statements. Really? Mm-hmm. And I'm here to tell you right now that a lot of things that people who follow Jesus, who seek God, will tell you that it's a sin that you can't do sexually. You can. As a matter of fact, the Bible's not against it at all. As a matter of fact, I'll even show you some passages where the Bible talks about it in a very positive way. You see, really? Really? So next week, we'll start off with the 10 taboos. You can't do this, you can't do this. Then I'm going to summarize it all. And then we'll start looking into, wait a minute, then it's not that limited. It really isn't. There are a lot of things we can do that will enjoy with each other. Absolutely. You say, are you just going to stay in that same passage, 1 Corinthians 7? We've been there for 2 episodes now. No, we're actually going to move into the Song of Songs, that romantic book that Solomon wrote. But we'll also be showing you passages when it comes to the things that we shouldn't do. It should be an interesting passage. In other words, you won't get to the end of next week and say, my goodness, we can't do anything. What's going to happen is, when we get to the end of next week, you're going to say, wow, look at the freedom in Christ we have to make love to each other. I hope you come back for that. In the meantime, open your Bible.